Welcome in. I am Tyler Pyburn, your host for today's show. It is all about creating a zero-waste kitchen with CLF. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We've got a wonderful program lined up for you today, and I already see some questions in the chat, which is just incredible to see as we get this thing started. So today's show is really just a special event that kicks off CLF/Trash Challenge. Say that 5 times fast. It's a week-long challenge encouraging all of you to reduce your food waste. Now, if you're not already registered for the challenge, make sure to follow CLF on all social platforms that will allow you to participate in our daily challenges. So here's how to do it. You can follow us by just using the hashtag /Trash Challenge on Instagram, Conservation Law Foundation, Twitter at CLF, and Facebook at the CLF. Right? Remember Facebook? They had the Facebook in the beginning. We're the same way. The CLF, obviously. Now, if you are having any sort of technical difficulties, we're standing by. We're ready to help you out. Make sure to send an email over to Emma Keeney. She'll be able to take care of you. Her email address is ekeaney@clf.org. So with all of that, we want to really get right into the meat of the show to kind of dive in and just start getting the conversation rolling. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Peter Blair to a little bit of a breakdown on the food waste problem itself. Peter, thanks so much for jumping on the show with us today, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Tyler. And I'm really happy to be here talking about a really important and a really big issue. This is a big issue because we waste so much food in this country. On average, the U.S. wastes about 125 to 160 billion pounds of food each year. That was billions with a B. Not only is this a shameful statistic in light of the fact that 38 million people in this country go hungry every year, but it's yet another way we are needlessly wrecking the planet. And that's because all of this wasted food has significant environmental impacts. To start, when we waste food, we aren't just wasting the food we forgot about in the back of our fridge. We're also wasting all the money, the time, the energy, and the water that was used to grow and process and transport that food. Throwing out a couple pounds of ground beef may not seem like a big deal, but really, you're wasting about 13,000 gallons of water. And the disposal of food waste adds another layer of environmental concern. Virtually all of that 160 billion pounds of food waste ends up in landfills. And that takes up a lot of space. And taking up this space really just pushes landfill operators to continue to argue that they need to expand existing landfills or build new ones. And the last thing we need to do is give these companies more reason to try to build these facilities. And to make matters worse, not only is this food taking up space in landfills, but it's also contributing to climate change. When organic material like food is put in a landfill, it breaks down into methane, creating a powerful greenhouse gas. And the amount of methane isn't negligible. Landfills are actually one of the largest sources of methane producers in this country. The EPA estimates that around 18% of all methane emissions come from landfills. And that number is actually very likely a gross understatement. The true number is probably a lot higher. So we clearly need to address this issue. And there's 2 ways we can do it. The first is we can cut down on the amount of food waste we create in our own kitchens. And we're so lucky to have Mei and Irene here who are going to walk us through the ways that we can cut down on food waste in our own homes and a bunch of tips and tricks that I'm very excited to learn. And the second way we can tackle this issue is just by keeping food waste out of the landfill and by composting it instead. Composting is a process of recycling organic material into valuable fertilizer that can help grow new food and empower the planet. This helps support local farms and helps keep methane out of the atmosphere. So clearly, this is a huge issue, but one we can all collectively work to address, and I'm really excited to be here. I'll kick it back over to Tyler.
Awesome, Peter. Thanks so much. And those numbers are just incredible, especially when you talked about just the ground beef throwing out the amount of water that's being used. So those numbers it definitely resonate for sure. And one of the things I mentioned off the top of the show was talking about getting involved in this conversation. Now, we already saw our question in the chat itself. That's wonderful to see, but I also want to invite you to and encourage you to make sure that you jump in the conversation as well. So directly to the right of the video player itself, you'll see if you aren't already logged in, just enter your name, hit enter, and you'll be able to ask your questions. We're going to be able to have those questions for our guest a little bit later on in the show. So make sure to enter those in, and we would love to have you participate. And, you know, I know our experts would love to have those questions thrown their way as well. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and kind of keep this conversation moving. I want to introduce Mei and Irene Lee, the co-founders of Food Waste Feast and Mei Mei Dumplings in Boston. They join CLF Zero Waste Policy Analyst Lauren Fernandez from their home kitchens to help us break down the components of leading to our food less. Plus, they're going to be sharing a few tips and tricks on how to cut down food waste in your kitchen, which I'm literally going to be taking notes because that is my biggest pet peeve in the history of the world. So thank you so much for being here to share that perspective. So without further ado, as I mentioned, Lauren, I want to hand it over to you and we can go ahead and take it away. So thank you so much, and all you.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And thank you to Mei and Irene for your time and sharing your story today and joining us. So I know we've received some questions. We're probably receiving some questions in the chat from our viewers about your own journeys on how you reduce waste in the kitchen. So to get us started today, I'd love to hear about what led both of you to create Food Waste Feast.
Hi, everyone. So we are really excited to be here today, and thank you so much for having us. We together started a food truck and a restaurant back in Boston in 2012. And basically, once we started our business, our food business, we realized how much of our money we were spending on food, and that if any of that went into the trash, that was like our hard-earned money going straight into these big trash bins. And we realized that if we could make sure to be using all parts of the animal and the vegetable, that we would save money, that we could be more creative with our menu. At this time, we're also doing a lot of working with farmers, and it was really sad seeing all the food that they worked so hard to grow to just go straight into the trash. So that kind of trickled down to our other businesses and into our home kitchens. And we realized that it's about 35 to 40% of food waste that actually takes place in people's homes. And that is sometimes surprising to people. I mean, it's a big issue up and down the food chain, but in almost every home, a good amount of food goes to waste. And we want to be here to offer our professional advice and some chef tips and just, advice from busy people who cook and have to eat and make sure that those things just don't go to waste.
I'll add something. And around that time when we were first opening the food truck, we were also volunteering on a local farm here in Boston, an urban farm. And we helped the team there harvest hundreds of pounds of produce on Tuesdays and Thursdays in preparation for their farmers market. And I think it was good physical training for being on the line, 12 hours a day on the food truck. But it also really gave us an appreciation for all of the work that goes into growing food. I think farming is probably some of the very hardest work out there, harder than chefing, although that comes with its own challenges. So having a really kind of holistic sense of what goes into producing food, not just in the kitchen, but on the farm as well, I think that really inspired us to think about this differently.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Irene. And thank you, Mei, as well. I'm really excited to hear more because I'm always interested in figuring out how to reduce my own waste. And, even though I have compost, I'm like, I shouldn't just default to my compost. I should figure out how to reduce before even putting it in there. So I know that we have had some of our attendees today submitted questions in advance for you that we'll go through today. But I know that you all have also prepared some of your own food waste free cooking tips for us. So we would love for you all to share those with everyone. And in between those couple of tips, I'm going to ask some more audience questions. So to start us off, I'd love to hear more about your first food tip about smoothie bags and stock bags.
Yes, so this is one of my favorite tips, and I have some visuals to show also. So I have a smoothie bag here, as you can see labeled. This is a reusable bag I keep in my freezer, and especially if any of you have kids, you will know that they say, I want an apple, I want a pear, and then they leave 3/4 of it, and nobody else wants to eat it, but you don't want that to go to waste. So I put it in my smoothie bag, and this is full of plums and watermelon slices and all sorts of things that they didn't eat. And what I do is I stash it in the freezer, and whenever they want a smoothie or I want to make popsicles, I have something that can just be popped in the blender and fed back to them. So they do actually eat it at some point. And I also have a stock bag. So this has got Parmesan rinds in it. It's got wrinkly peppers. It's got onion ends and skins. So there's a lot of parts that either are, the tops of your carrots or your carrot peels. It could be something that's wrinkly. You're going through the fridge and it's a little old to eat, but you still want to get that flavor, especially things like onions, scallions, garlic, the bottom of a garlic, the skins, everything. Those can all be saved, and those add a ton of flavor to a stock. Meat bones, if you have a rotisserie chicken, if you have rib bones, all of that. I have actually 3 or 4 stock bags going in my freezer right now. And when they fill up, I put them in a pot. I cover it with water and boil it anywhere from an hour to 8 hours if I've got meat bones. And it just adds flavor to anything. If you're making beans, pasta, soup, whatever, you've got delicious homemade stock. So now I go to the grocery store and I look at people and they've got stock in their bins. And I'm like, you can have that for free. Don't spend money on that.
That is so true. And it's true. Anyone who cares for young children knows it's true. Sometimes they just want to peel a banana and then leave the entire banana on the table. So I can definitely relate. So I love this idea. I'm definitely going to try this. Thank you so much, Mei. And our second tip for today, I would love to hear more about, which I've heard a bit about this, but I don't really know how to do it, is how do we regrow scallions?
So during the pandemic, I think a lot of people got really excited / bored, and growing scallions on one's windowsill turned out to be a little bit of a trend, along with sourdough starters and the like. So it turns out that when you buy the scallions and those roots are on the very bottom of them, those roots can continue growing after you have chopped off the greens and the whites, and you can use them again. So sticking those scallions, and often the bottom of any number of vegetables you can regrow in a little bit of water on your countertop. May, I'm not sure if you have any scallions on hand right now, but same goes for if you buy hydroponic lettuce, if you have cabbage with the sort of core still attached, all of those things can regrow at least to some extent on your countertop. And again, I think it gives us an appreciation for what it really takes to grow food. When you see how slowly they grow on the countertop, you realize that a lot of work and love went into those scallions that are just easy to snap up at the grocery store.
I actually have my scallion jar with me, although I used the scallions for an omelet this morning, but I left the jar of water on my windowsill. It looks really nice. And also, my only tip is that you should change the water every day or so. Otherwise, you get this really strong oniony smell that kind of wafts around and is not ideal. But it's really cool to watch them grow because you basically get 2 big things of scallions for the price of 1. You just snip them off, put the little hairy bits in the bottom, and they just grow up, and all of a sudden you get double the scallions. It's so cool.
Maybe you could use that water in your stock bag, May.
Great call. I'm not going to drink it.
Well, that's really amazing. And all of those ways sounds like they save us money. Like, I think sometimes we don't even realize we're going to the store and buying things that we already have and we didn't realize we have. So thank you both so much for those tips. I want to move us on to one of the questions we had someone from the audience submit in advance. So that question is, what financial case for adopting zero waste practices would you make to convince other restaurant owners? Do you think zero waste can successfully be implemented in restaurants with a tight cash flow? In other words, like small immigrant businesses. Is this something viable for them?
I love this question. I think during the pandemic, when the prices of food have gone up so much for restaurant owners and chefs, it's a really, really timely question. I think that going to zero waste is maybe not realistic for a lot of businesses, but certainly reducing waste is always in the best financial interest of the restaurant, as long as they're still putting out a really high quality product. For me and for us at Mei Mei, that really has to do with planning. So if we know that we're going to get a bunch of carrots and they're going to have the tops on them, can we sort of co-plan 2 dishes that utilize all of those things together? So for restaurants that have a very rapidly rotating menu, it can be a little bit more challenging, but usually with enough sort of advanced thought, you can make sure that you're using every part of the vegetable or the fruit or the meat. We also love dehydrators. And so especially in, high-end restaurants, when you see different sauces and powders all over the plate, a lot of the time, those delicious powders are beet skins that are dried and then blitzed in a blender. So if you want to get a little bit fancy and you have a dehydrator, you can set your oven really low. Making some of those powders is a pretty exciting way to dress up a dish.
Thanks so much. May, did you want to add anything to that question?
No, just that Irene has done a lot of work with small businesses, especially immigrant-owned businesses through the pandemic. So she is the perfect person to talk to about that.
Definitely. And I think that was a great way to explain it, Irene, because maybe this idea of zero waste can be very overwhelming to people. But the idea of what can we just do to reduce our waste is a really more realistic way to approach that. So I'd love to move back into our food tips that we have. So the next food tip we have, I would love to hear about is quick fridge pickles. That's really difficult to say. You should try saying that 5 times really quickly.
Quick fridge pickles. I love pickling things because it is a great way to preserve just about any food that you have. Typically vegetables, but you could do fruits too with a little more sugar than with salt. It is nice for even if your veggies are a little on the older end. I'm always just clearing out my fridge and saying, okay, what can I pickle? And it makes dishes so much more interesting if you've got some acidity and brightness going on. And it's really nice because you can also be very flexible with what you have in your kitchen. You can keep it very basic. I call it a 1-to-1-to-1-to-1 ratio. So it's 1 cup of water, 1 cup of the vinegar of your choice. So that could be like a rice vinegar or a white wine vinegar or an apple cider vinegar, and also a tablespoon of sugar and a tablespoon of salt. So it's easy to remember, but you can then adjust it if you want a sweeter pickle or a saltier pickle. You can add in all the spices that you've got, anything from bay leaves or black pepper or garlic. And we call them fridge pickles because it's not, canned in a water bath and sterilized, because I think, I like to make things as easy as possible. I've got 2 young kids. So many people out there, they think that food waste, reducing your food waste is something that has to be done by, someone with lots of time who knows how to, sterilize something in a water bath. And I really have no idea how to do that. But a fridge pickle, you just leave it to sit in your fridge. It will last for a really long time. I genuinely think I have fridge pickles that are over a year old in my fridge. And you know what? They're totally fine.
May also taught me this amazing trick, which is if you cut into an avocado and you realize that it is not in the 5-minute window where it's perfectly ripe, you can actually put a really quick pickle on it, get it into some vinegar with some salt, and that will soften it up. I don't know exactly what is happening molecularly there, but it's a great tip. The heartbreak
so good. Yes. Every single time you're like, this avocado is ready for guacamole, and it's not. So then you should pickle it, and after 20 minutes, it is delicious.
That's such a good idea. I love avocados. And you're right, that's so accurate. There's always it's like a 5-minute window, and then you're like, that's it, it's gone. So it's always so disappointing. But thank you so much for those tips. Our next food tip I'd love to hear about is our hero recipes like frittatas and pantry pasta. That sounds really delicious.
Oh yeah, and what's fun is that picture is actually a frittata made from my pantry pasta. So that was leftover pasta frittata right there. And it just goes to show that you can put just about anything in a frittata. And what we call hero recipes are our recipes that are good to have kind of in your back pocket that you like, where you can kind of open the fridge and see, okay, what do I have for meats? What do I have for veggies? What here needs to be used up? Okay, you know what? That can all go into a frittata. The leftover deli meats can be chopped up. The wrinkly carrot can be cut into tiny slices. You've got 5 kinds of cheese left over from that fancy cheese board you made. Those can all go into the frittata. Your pickles can go into a frittata. And I actually like to put it all on a sheet pan and then divide it into sections. So each member of the family gets the kind of things that they want in the frittata. So my kids get the just cheese and egg. I get all the fresh herbs. My husband gets the leftover salami or whatever it is. And you can really customize it. And there are a bunch of recipes like that. We've got them on our website, which is foodwastefeast.com. But the idea is to have these recipes that you know how to make, where you can just kind of forage through the fridge and toss anything in.
That's such a great idea because I feel like that's happened to me multiple times where I'm like, we're not going to eat all this like leftover, things from a cheese plate or something from the night before. So that's a wonderful idea. Thank you so much for those tips. It's really, I hope people are taking notes because these are going to save you all so much money. I'm going to take another question that we had from the audience. Really excited about this one because I really love bacon. We'd love to hear what can you do with used cooking oil or bacon grease?
This is such a great question and very timely because I actually had bacon just this morning. And so I made a little demonstration for you right here. So this is my saved bacon grease. And basically what I do, this is not strictly necessary, but it helps if you have paper coffee filters, which I have left over in my cupboard from a coffee machine that I don't own, but I can't throw them out. And they're perfect for filtering your bacon grease. So this keeps it, like the little bacon bits, from staying in your bacon fat and burning later. So basically, this makes lots of things delicious. If you love bacon, then cooking with bacon grease makes things extra delicious. So if you're going to use it really quickly, you can keep it by the side of your stove for a few days. If not, I just pop it in the fridge. And anything that I think would benefit from baconiness, this gets a spoonful of this in cooking. And I use it in place of cooking oil. And speaking of which, we are very used to dealing with used cooking oil when we had a deep fat fryer on our food truck. And you can reuse that cooking oil a bunch of times, actually. And if you can, so what you do is you strain it, and it might change color. That's totally fine. And you strain out any bits so things don't burn, but you can reuse that a bunch of times. Just keep it somewhere where it is dark, and basically until it starts to get smelly, then you can keep using that. Irene's actually, you might not have more to say as you actually deal with like high volume frying on a much more regular basis.
I do. A good test is frying a cube of bread in your used cooking oil. If it comes out tasting like old French fries, then maybe that oil is all set and you can take care of it whatever way is best for you. But if it still tastes pretty good, you can still fry in it. In addition to that, there's a really cool trick that's similar to how French chefs typically clarify stock. So you can take gelatin, like the main ingredient in Jell-O, mix it into hot water and mix that with your used cooking oil. The water will settle out and pull a lot of the impurities and off flavors and particulate down with it. And then you get this kind of hockey puck of gross fryer oil Jell-O, which you can then just throw out or wash down your sink. And it gives your fryer oil a second life. So it's pretty magical.
I didn't even know that, so that is cool to learn.
That does sound really magical and really tasty. I am getting ready for dinner now. So I'd love to move back into our food tips. This is round 3, so continue to take notes because I don't think you want to miss these tips. So tip number 5, can you tell us more about not peeling vegetables or roasting them with Parmesan?
I am happy to expound on this because I have found that not peeling vegetables is wonderful because, first of all, I'm actually a pretty lazy cook. And so if I can skip steps, that always makes me really happy. And there's so many vegetables where we kind of get used to peeling them. But number one, there's so much fiber and nutrients in the peel. It also usually makes for a much more interesting textural difference. So I love to leave my potato peels in my mashed potatoes, for example. And if you were making, oven fries or something like that, you get much more of a crispy, crunchy edge if you have peels on. But when my husband makes mashed potatoes, he prefers no peels. And so what I do then is I take the peels, and I like to do this for pretty much any root vegetable out there. I've done it with beets, carrots, parsnips, potatoes, rutabaga. I think everything worked unless it's got a waxy coating on the outside. And basically what you do is you take all of your peels, toss them with some olive oil, salt, pepper, and Parmesan, and then lay them out on a baking sheet, pop them in the oven for maybe 10 to 20 minutes at 400 roughly. It'll depend on how much you have. And then all of a sudden you have these deliciously crispy chips that you can then dip into something like a homemade ranch or mayonnaise or ketchup and whatever it is. Kids love them. I love them. They're like the perfect snack while you're waiting for your really smooth mashed potatoes to be done. So it's a great way of using those all up and having something to snack on and also making sure those peels don't go into the trash.
Wow, I would have never thought that, and I love sweet potatoes, and like that is the part I don't enjoy the most is peeling them. It just takes so long. So thank you so
Totally.
much for that tip. So the next tip we have is I'd love to hear more about expiration dates and smell test.
Oh yeah, so this is a big one. Well, so what I think so many people don't know is that expiration dates are not a standardized practice. The federal government doesn't oversee them, and it's generally just what the manufacturer deems as like this is best by this date. But that doesn't mean that it is unsafe to eat. It just means that this is when it looks its most pristine, or when the color is most what the manufacturer thinks that it should look like. And so many people will look at it and say, oh, I have to throw this out. The expiration date was yesterday. But there are so many things that are perfectly fine to eat for even weeks beyond your expiration date, which I tend to do. And I just ignore them completely, basically. And that goes to trusting yourself and your senses. And actually, the smell test is validated by real scientists, of which I am not one, but I have read that they actually say, the smell test is legitimate if you, of course, and this I should actually qualify that if you are feeding small children or elderly or immunocompromised in any way, you should be more careful. But if you are a healthy adult and you feel comfortable with the way that something smells, then it is almost always good to eat. Irene she's the one who is Serve Safe restaurant certified, so she may have opinions on this that I don't have, but I'm like, oh, expiration date, that's fine. No.
Yeah, I think a lot of expiration dates are totally arbitrary, and so much of cooking, I think, is about confidence and willingness to experiment. And if you're willing to experiment a little with your own GI tract, then you can learn a lot. And I trust the smell test for sure. If something is going bad and you really shouldn't eat it, that item will let you know. Your food will tell you, don't eat me.
Well, I think that, I wish that my husband was here to listen to you, because he argues about this with me all the time, because he doesn't want to waste things. And I was just like, yes, I think we're going to have to connect you all. We're going to have to stop by Mei Mei's Dumplings really soon.
Totally.
So we're going to take another question from the audience. So what is the one change that American consumers could make that would make the biggest impact in regards to food waste? And apologies if you can't hear that. That's a little zero waster in the background.
Aww, so cute. Well, I would say one of the big ones, which was mentioned earlier, is figuring out a way that your food scraps don't go into the trash. As mentioned, it's a huge environmental issue. It takes up space in landfills, and it could be put to good use in our gardens. And so composting can be tough, especially if you don't have any outdoor space. I outsource mine to an organization that picks it up, and then delivers me back compost that I pay for. But again, that's not always an option for people. If you are lucky enough to have curbside compost, that's great. But there are also solutions like, for example, there's an app called Share Waste where you can look up people or organizations who are willing to take your food scraps. I have friends who put everything in their freezer so it doesn't smell, and then once a week they take a walk to their community garden that accepts food scraps. I have friends who take their compost every week to the farmer's market. There might be someone there who accepts your food scraps. So with a little research, a lot of times, even my friends who live in high rises in New York, they have a way to use up their food scraps, and that would just make a huge difference across the board if we weren't putting so much organic waste into the trash.
That's so well said, and I completely agree. I've lived in apartments for most of my life, and I've been able to compost for most of my adult life. So I'd
That's
love,
awesome.
Irene. Yeah, Irene, did you want to add anything to that?
I am very passionate about composting. I actually have 2 credits and am a certified master composter. I went to Cornell for my undergrad. But I think that in restaurants, composting can be a really interesting challenge because it tends to be more expensive than, trash and recycling management. But at Mei Mei, I think our staff was so accustomed to it that every so often our bin would get too full and we would have to put food scraps in the dumpster. And the cooks would just be heartbroken. Like, I can't believe these squash seeds are going to go into a landfill. And so I think that, creating systems that make it easy and that make it feel like the most sort of natural choice, that can really reinforce those behaviors.
Yeah, and just to that, there's a lot of, the hope too is, can you contact your local municipality? Can you contact someone and say, we're looking for curbside compost here? And I just am joining a group here where I live, near Raleigh, North Carolina, and we're working to try to push our local government to add curbside compost to their general waste management. And so, it's something that hopefully in the future, more organizations and governments will be able to bring on board. But yes, getting into that mindset and thinking about the ways that you can make sure that your food scraps don't end up in trash is just a really big first step.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. I think those are really helpful tips, and I hope that people can, figure out different avenues to reduce their food waste at home. So I'd love to move into food tips round 4. So what can you tell us about frozen bread?
Oh, yes. So I will not throw out any bread. I put all of my bread into the freezer, and you'll notice this theme of the freezer is like your time capsule friend, that basically they count down on the food that you have. It stops. You put it in the freezer, and the anything that was going to go bad is just halted there. And so I like to save bread, especially, bread. I used to find that I would take a loaf of bread home from the supermarket and the end of it would always go bad before I had a chance to eat it. And probably some of you are familiar with this. And what I started doing was immediately freezing half, or if not the whole loaf of bread. Because if you're going to toast it anyway, which I always do, you can toast it directly from frozen, and it just adds, a minute to your cook time. And then you're making sure that none of that bread goes to waste. And the picture that was just up was a bread pudding, which is what I do when that bread starts to accumulate. I make a sweet bread pudding or a savory bread pudding, which again, those are both great hero recipes where you can put basically any chopped vegetable, any cheese, any deli meat. Those can all go into a savory bread pudding. Any fruit, something like coconut flakes or chocolate chips, all those can go into a sweet bread pudding. And then those are also great for croutons, breadcrumbs, all sorts of things that really add a lot of life and texture to your food. It's great to just be able to pull out of your freezer and then add to a dish, and all of a sudden you've got something way fancier than you originally started with.
That sounds so amazing. I really want to try that now. What can you tell us about cooking lettuce?
This is a really fun one too. And I once heard this Chinese chef say, why are Westerners so against cooking lettuce and cucumber? And it turns out that those dishes are things that are often stir-fried in China, but you can also make a really good lettuce soup. That's a picture of a lettuce soup right there. So you can kind of treat it how you would a spinach or a watercress, which are slightly more familiar to people when it comes to soups. You can just, give it a light saute and some garlic, add some of your really delicious homemade stock that you made from your stock bag, and some of those breadcrumbs from your frozen bread, and all of a sudden you have this really fancy soup, and it has way more flavor than you would think. And also, a hot pan, some garlic, toss your lettuce in there as a stir fry, and all of a sudden you have this delicious, easy side dish. And what's so cool about it is that the lettuce cooks down into something it's cooked form in 30 seconds. So it's the fastest vegetable side dish that you could ever make.
Yeah, and I just want to point out
awesome.
that a lot of these tips and tricks really sort of reinforce one another. And so having a great hero recipe is something that, allows you to use up a number of different things, including, for example, your bread when you got too excited at the bakery, which is what I usually do. Having, your stock bag helps you make your delicious lettuce soup. So the more of this you do, you kind of build up an arsenal of not only skills, but a stockpile of things in your pantry or your freezer or your fridge that can really help you just keep that creativity going. And I think one of the things that Mei does so well is make this fun and non-judgmental, because we've all thrown out that thing of spinach in the back of the fridge before. And you don't have to start from scratch every time if you have your stock bag or your smoothie bag or your bread in the freezer.
That's absolutely true. And I love the idea of having fun with it and making it something creative and not judging each other or ourselves, even for what
Or
we
yourself,
do.
absolutely.
Yes. So we're gonna take another question from the audience. So if I defrost something and only use a little bit of it, say something like a berry compote, can I refreeze the rest for future use instead of throwing it out?
So one thing that I think is really helpful here is generally the best way to thaw something safely is to do it in the fridge. And if you thaw something in the fridge, you can always refreeze what was in there. And that includes meat, which I was actually surprised to learn, but I looked it up on the USDA website and they are extremely careful. So if they say it's okay, it is okay. And Irene probably has more to say about this, but especially something like a berry compote, I would say would be fine. I'm not particularly good at, thawing things in advance, which if you want to do it in the fridge takes longer, of course. But, if you kind of bring it down to fridge temperature and then you can always put the rest of it in the microwave or use some other quicker method of heating it up, then you can put the rest back in the freezer.
Yeah, I would add that when you're using things out of the freezer, if you are able to have presence of mind when you're putting them in there, to put them in perhaps an ice cube tray instead of in a container or a bag. That helps you, take exactly as much as you need. And so imagine your ice cube tray full of berry compote. You can just pop one cube out when you're ready to use it. And then over the course of, a few weeks of pancakes or what have you, you've gone through all of those cubes. Same goes for stock, pesto, herbs in water or oil, a lot of great tricks that you can use those special silicone molds for if you bought too many of those, which I know Mei did, or you can just use a good old-fashioned ice tray.
Yeah, so I will add to that too. The problem with silicone molds is that you put something in them and then you leave them there for a really long time. So I actually have a freezer full of things in silicone molds and then I run out of them. So what I do is actually, if you freeze something, so I have, for example, one time I had a huge bag of garlic cloves that was about to go bad and I pureed it in oil and then I froze it into a bag. But if you freeze it like this horizontally and it becomes a really flat frozen thing, then it's really easy to just snap off a piece when you want to use it. And it also means that your freezer will be neater. I know many people out there probably have a freezer that you pull into and you're like, what is in here? That happens to me a lot still. But if I freeze things so they're vertical, then you can stack them up nicely. And it's much easier to see what things are. You can put a little label on it, and then it is easy to both snap off an end and then just put it right back in the freezer instead of like a big squat pile that you really have to defrost the whole thing to be able to use.
Wow, I think that's such a great idea. Like organization is everything. I've tried to do that myself. Like labeling, I've noticed is very helpful, or like stacking things in a way that like I'm not like searching,
Yes,
constantly
totally.
for things. Yeah, that really, really helps. Thank you so much. Well, I want to take us into our final round of food tips. So what can you tell us about roasted prepped veggies?
So roasting veggies is my main trick for when things are starting to get a little old in the fridge. And roasting kind of helps get rid of all the just a little, the skin doesn't look as nice because it's a little older, it's getting a little wrinkly. You might not want to eat it fresh in a salad, but if you toss it in the oven, like 400 degrees, I always start with 15 minutes for just about everything and then just go from there and check on it regularly. But the idea is that first of all, the older veggies are delicious and the maybe skin that's a little wrinkly or limp, it doesn't matter anymore. But also it means that you then have these roasted prepped veggies that are so easy to just eat. Either you can eat them straight, you can dip them into something, you can put them on top of a salad, you can mix them into rice. Again, they're kind of ready to be eaten, and that just makes it much less likely that you are going to waste them. So, if you can open the fridge and you have prepped veggies ready to go, that's just something that you can eat right away. Whereas if you just kind of ignore them and let them sit even longer and longer, they're probably going to end up in the trash. So I'm always about whenever things are starting to get on the older side, roast them, have them ready to go. And the nice thing is you can just toss in everything that you've got. You can have 4 different vegetables roasting in the oven at the same time. And then I like to do that on the weekends. I toss everything in, then I eat them dipped into things while they're, just out of the oven. And then you have them ready to go for meals during the week. And then you've got your meal prep done. And you'll see.
Did you? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You'll see in the picture for the next tip is actually the same picture because it talks about stems and stalks. And so you can see there, that's the broccolini at the bottom. I eat a lot of stalks and stems, and I recommend that everyone do it whenever they can too. Usually they just require a little bit of extra cook time. So, let's say you just chop them separately. You've got your stems and your leaves. Maybe something needs to be peeled. So broccoli stems are great. You just have to give the outer layer a little bit of a peel, and then you just cook them a minute or two longer than you cook the florets. And so that also cuts down a lot of food waste if you get used to eating the stems and stalks of things that before you would just peel off and discard.
Oh, I was already eating the stalks, so that makes me feel great. So I'm
Good
sorry.
for you.
Yeah. I would love to hear some of your perspective on this, Irene.
Just wanted to add that usually the stalks and the stems will have a really different texture from the rest of the vegetable, and often they have more fiber in them too. So making sure that you're getting the most out of that bunch of kale that you paid for with your hard-earned money, that's a great opportunity to use up something that's a little bit different from the rest of the bunch of kale, and it's going to be really healthy for you too.
Right, and that also works. I'll add conversely the things where we get free leaves, like beets, where beet leaves are related to chard, for example, but we pay for chard leaves and people just throw out their beet leaves. So there's so many vegetables where you're getting two things for the price of one, but just because we're not as used to eating them, they tend to get thrown out. So thinking about those, and either eating the leaves of something where you're used to eating the root, or the stems where you're used to eating the floret, or whatever it is, there's a lot of good food there that can save you a ton of money.
Wow, I did not know that about beet leaves, because now I'm not going to buy chard anymore. If I'm already buying beets, I might as well just, save myself a few dollars. So I want to move us into the last question from the audience. So we have received quite a number of questions about this topic, about the best way to store food to ensure it stays fresh for as long as possible. So what tips can you share with us about food storage?
Though there's tons of stuff to say about food storage. We do have a lot of tips on our website because so many things are depend on exactly what it is. But I can share. I wanted to show some of my favorite things that are also help you create a plastic-free or minimal plastic kitchen. I love beeswax wraps. So these pieces of fabric that are coated with beeswax, they protect the food, but they also allow it to breathe. So that can help extend the life of a lot of fruits and vegetables, especially if you've cut it in half. You can just cover the edge with a beeswax wrap, and that will extend the life. I also really like silicone bags in place of plastic bags. These are really helpful for storing food and your stock and smoothie bags. I also, love to save jars. So your jam jars and whatever was in this, some kind of pickle, use them again, label them. As we were talking about this before, organization helps you have a zero waste kitchen. I like to use painter's tape and permanent markers. If you write down what it is and the date, you are less likely to forget and then have to throw it out. You think every time you're going to remember what that brown stuff is, but I found that much of the time you don't. 6 months later, you will be glad that you spent the time to put in this the label. And lastly, I love this is something that Irene started at our restaurant, which is the Eat Me First box, or the Cook Me First box, which has all the bits and odds and ends that you use in the course of cooking, but don't use the whole thing. So, for example, mine currently has, it's a quarter of a lime, a wrinkly, almost, color turned jalapeno. Because I have children, it has half a banana and a bit of a pear, some garlic cloves, some wrinkly ginger. And the idea is that if you keep it at the front of your fridge at eye level, you open up the fridge and you go there first. And you know that that's where the extra garlic is, the half of the lemon, and they don't get pushed to the back of the fridge where then you have like 6 lemon halves hanging out at the back of the fridge, which has happened to me before I implemented this. And the idea is just, again, back to that organization, helping you keep things where they need to be and where you know to go to them first so they don't get wasted.
Yeah, and I would add, if you, like me, eat a lot of takeout, saving your takeout containers and giving them a second life can be a very cost-effective way of building out your Tupperware set. If you order from like the same couple places every week or every month, you can get, I don't know, like a set of 8 or 10 matching containers, which are really great. And the clear deli containers, the round ones that come in different sizes, those are also what restaurants use to store their food. So it really is more of a storage vessel than a takeout container necessarily, but it can be used as both. So I love to stockpile, my spouse would say hoard, takeout containers. We cull through them every now and again, but it is satisfying to give that plastic a second life.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and I would. Sorry, I could go on for ages, but another thing is actually paying attention to your fridge. Things like those drawers that say fruit or vegetable or high humidity, low humidity, they will actually help keep your fruits and vegetables longer. And I never knew that until recently. But if you actually pay attention to where things are going and what should go in the right drawer, it will keep your fruits and vegetables longer.
Oh, those are all really helpful tips. I love the Eat Me First box. I did something similar too, and it actually does work. And I love seeing things like the beeswax wraps. Those seem to be catching on in kind of mainstream culture. Like I've seen them at places like Trader Joe's and other major grocery chains. So definitely, keep an eye out for those type of things. It's not this, really difficult thing that you have to locate, at some random store, but these are becoming more and more common as the need to reduce our food waste catches on. So thank you both so much, Mei and Irene. I've learned so much from both of you today. I'm excited to check out Mei Mei's Dumplings in the future. So I feel like I hope the audience found these tips really helpful. I'm sure that they did. So I'd love to transition it back to Tyler.
Yeah, absolutely. I reiterate that same sentiment. I mean, I honestly love the three of you. All three of you should have your own show and just go on the road. That was just amazing. It really was. And the other thing I have to ask before I get to Mei, what does your countertop actually look like right now? The amount of props that you kept pulling over was just like endless. It's just, I was wondering, like, is there someone handing you things? Because
I have my tray of props, which I went foraging in my kitchen right before the thing started, which I use all these things on a regular basis. So it's nice to just show them. And, you don't have to, I think about people and getting the idea of zero waste into their lifestyle is that you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money. You don't have to go buy all these products, so many things. You just save the jars, save the takeout containers that you have, and you can slowly incorporate them into your life. The next time you run out of plastic wrap, go buy some beeswax wraps instead. But don't feel like you have to go out and, spend more to then waste less.
Awesome. I love that. That's very cool. So there has been a ton of chatter in the chat right next to the video player, and keep them coming. We're going to try to get to as many as we can in the next about 10 minutes, give or take. But some of the questions you were able to answer throughout the way without even knowing that they were even coming through. But these are some of the things that were coming up live right now. So first question I have to ask you is, individual efforts will have an impact. However, what is being done to encourage corporations and large organizations to reduce their waste and trash? So that was something you touched upon a little bit when it comes to curbside compost. Well, what are some other thoughts that you think they, larger corporations could jump on board with?
I think for me, especially in Boston, we have seen some legislation around how businesses are required to manage their waste. Unfortunately, a lot of these ordinances don't really have any teeth. And so a lot of the time it just comes down to the decision of the small business owner or the demands of their clientele. I don't know if anyone else on the call knows a little bit more about what's being done at this level on food waste, but I think it always makes us excited when we see people getting passionate about this issue. Watching institutions like schools respond to the demands of students is something we've been seeing a lot of lately. So that's always been something that we look forward to and definitely support.
Awesome. Love that. So I want to, again, I'm going to just, go ahead, Peter. You can jump right in.
Sorry, I was going to jump in and just say, we are seeing action at the state level as well. So these ordinances, sometimes they don't have teeth, but it's working its way up the chain. So Vermont, for example, right here in New England, has banned all food waste from going to landfills and is mandating composting and food waste diversion. So that's starting to catch on. And that's a way that all the big institutions will have to abide by the law.
Awesome. Love it, Peter. Thank you for jumping in on that. Really do appreciate that. This next question comes from Jenna. So Jenna talks about any tips on bringing awareness to others, example, roommates, family, etc., to encourage others to get excited about reducing food waste. So how do you spread the word? So, you know, my wife is a great example. She sees that date, that expiration date, and oh no, we have to compost that, we have to pour it down the drain. I mean, it makes my heart skip a beat, honestly, when she does that. It says, please, let's not do this. So how do you get others to kind of follow suit?
That's a great question. And I would say I'm kind of on a stealth campaign to help my husband get more on board with this too. And it has helped. One thing is just cook with the things that you have and don't tell them that you made it with something older or wrinkly. And they're like, oh, this is really good. And then my husband was like, oh, this dressing is so good. I'm just going to come back and pour it on my plate and like dip anything I can into it. And I was like, oh, cool. That was made with 4-day-old kale salad. And he was like, oh, okay. All right. And then you just kind of feed them things that are delicious, and then they'll realize that, you know, just because that thing had a little brown spot on it, or it was yellowed, or the expiration date was yesterday, we'll realize that those things will still be perfectly good to eat.
Yeah, and I would add that just making it as fun as possible to like experiment with food or try new things is a real motivator. I think, you know, moralizing to people about, you know, the ills of food waste is not always something that inspires. So, you know, if I have something that's going bad and I can say to my spouse, you know, let's see if we can make this into something delicious and try to kind of, you know, make a game or an experiment out of it, I think bringing the right level of enthusiasm can really help too.
I'd also add to, I had a family member who was visiting once a few years ago when we were still keeping a lot of our compost in the freezer before we had a pickup service available where we lived. And she screamed when she saw it because she's like, you guys are keeping garbage in your freezer. That's really disgusting. And I had to explain to her, like, this is food that we put into our body. It came from the earth and it's designed to go back into the earth. And, you know, that just kind of shifting her perspective of like, you've been taught to see things like banana peels and avocado peels as garbage, but it is life. This food gives you life and it needs to return to the earth so it can give the earth life. And I think with so many people concerned about the climate crisis, I post a lot of my personal social media pages to my friends about, you know, this is one of the easiest ways we can cut down on the amount of methane, you know, greenhouse gas. You know, this is just a simple way that you can participate in this. And I think a lot of people want a tangible thing that they can do to feel like they are helping, you know, not accelerate the climate crisis. So, you know, I think that's really catching on to a lot of people too.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. I love the idea of making it fun. I know for my kids, I've got way too many of them at home, to be totally honest with you. But their favorite thing to do is banana peels. It's like instead of trash, they run outside to the compost heap. It's like their favorite thing in the morning. Just, oh yeah, let's add it. Let's have fun. And you know, as long as it's fun, they're up for it. So totally can get on board with that. All right. I want to ask, I'll ask this question and one more after this. So this question comes from Brad. Brad, so you actually mentioned this a little bit earlier about bone broth, but he says, what's the best way to use inedible animal products? For example, I know you can use animal bones for bone broth, but are there any ways to make use of bones? Any other ways that you can make use of the bones?
I love bone broth, and I think making bone broth is the most effective way to get all the nutrients out of the bones. If you are making your bone broth, also known as stock, if you're really getting everything out of those bones, it means that when you take that beef bone or that pork chop bone and smush it between your fingers, it should just crumble. And that's how you know that you've cooked all of the nutrients and collagen out of that bone. And then there's not really that much that you can do with it after that, except put it in the compost. There are companies that also use bone meal, so ground up animal bones for things like dog food. So dog treats, if your dog is able to have animal bones, can be another great use for them.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. I have just one last question I'm going to get to because I know everybody has busy days and I know there's been a lot of chatter. So again, thank you to everybody that was jumping on board and has really been watching the show and participating. It's awesome to see. We absolutely love that. So this question we have comes from Eric. So Eric's question is, for those of us without composting, what about food that is put in the household food disposal, the sink? What are the consequences? I know this is something that comes up often in my town specifically. A lot of folks will be asking about what they should and shouldn't be putting in the disposal, which, I mean, do we say nothing? I mean, should we be using all of this? What are your thoughts on the disposal?
I don't have a ton of opinions here. I do know that, my plumber friend was like, way too much stuff goes down the disposal. Again, just the things that I mentioned earlier are, I know it can be really tough, especially if you live in a small space or a city, but, Googling around and seeing what might be your options for compost, and what Lauren was saying about keeping things in the freezer, if there are people concerned about smell, that really helps with minimizing, the impact of having compost out in your kitchen, and then finding someone who will take it. There are so many gardens or farmers or people who might be able to dispose of it. And otherwise, I just try to minimize what's going into my disposal.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I think wastewater treatment will have to be the next webinar topic, and we can all learn a little bit more about that.
Exactly. No, that was perfect. No, honestly, Peter, Lauren, May, Irene, can't say thank you enough for taking time out of your day to jump on the show with us. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, honestly, just sitting back and watching all of you. So again, thank you so much. And thanks to all of those that were watching on the other end as well and participating in the chat. We will have this on demand shortly. We just have to, put it through our processor and send it up to you. And again, the conversation really just does not end here. We mentioned the social channels that we would love for you to participate on earlier in the day. Continue to do that. We'd love for you to kind of get involved in the conversation. That's how we can keep it going more than anything else. So again, that'll do it for us. We will see you next time. I am Tyler Pyburn for CLF. Have a great one.